So this evening we're going to just have a bit of a discussion. I'll ask Gil lots of questions for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for sort of a larger discussion with the audience. So we'll just jump right in. The sort of topic for this evening is wartime cooking in Jerusalem and food in the 50s and 60s. So I wonder if we could start by having you talk a bit about the experiences of eating during period of wartime and then in the early state years in the period of austerity or the tzena that followed the war.
So I had the luck of being born way after Israel was established. I was born in 1962. Israel was established in 1948. So I have not experienced the major war of Israel, which is the War of Independence. Like every other Israeli, I've experienced many other wars. But when we were growing up, Jewish kids, and I guess that kids all over the world all hear the same story about why we should eat. We should eat because there are starving children in India and starving children in China. And in my decade, it was starving children in Biafra. But I heard other stories. I heard stories of the siege of Jerusalem. My mom and my aunt and their mother, my grandmother, lived in Jerusalem during the siege of Jerusalem. And whenever I refused eating, usually when there was fish on the table, which I don't eat until today, they would tell me stories of the siege and how it was broken and how people were running up and down the streets shouting, "We have food, we have food." So this combination of food and trauma was very, very significant in my growing up. Now, I grew up in a well-to-do family. We had money, we had maids, we had everything. But strangely enough, we did not eat at home. And this was very rare in Israel of the 60s because, Israel was established as a socialist country and the values were socialist. And you did not eat in order to have fun. You ate in order to survive. And it was almost impolite to enjoy food. But since both my parents were career people and very successful, they did not have the time to cook. My father, of course, like a man of the 60s, I would assume that he didn't know where the kitchen was in our apartment. My mother never cooked. She didn't know how to cook. It didn't interest her. And we would eat out. We would dine in restaurants in Jerusalem. There weren't many. And when I look back at the good restaurants that we went to, they were so naive. I mean, the food was really, really, really basic. But this is what gave me the education for one of my jobs that I keep up until today, which is I'm a restaurant critic for 30 years now. And usually people ask me, so what does it take to become a restaurant critic? What is the education that you need in order to become a restaurant critic? And it's only experience because it's all, it all depends on your taste. Whatever is good for you may be bad for me, But I believe that a restaurant critic should know what beef stroganoff is before he tries a molecular variation on the dish. And I believe a restaurant critic should have had chicken Kiev, preferably in Kiev, but if not, so at least with people from the Ukraine, before he or she judges a version of chicken Kiev that is on the table. So I had the luck to have that. That was a very long answer to a short question.
This is good. So I'm wondering a bit about your memoir, Candies from Heaven, that was recently translated into English, which is a really wonderful read. Speaking about issues of siege, about austerity, about conflict, you use humor significantly throughout this memoir, humor and food at the same time. And I'm wondering how you feel about this sort of tool in writing of using humor to talk about very painful topics, and if you have any pushback either from your readership or from family members who say you should be more serious about these topics.
So before we talk about humor, let's talk about tears. Why do I've written, in a period of 20 years, I've written a trilogy, it's called the Jerusalem Trilogy, of memoirs about growing up in Jerusalem and about my family. Very personal. I'm talking about people with their names, with their addresses. And Candies from Heaven, the one that was translated into English, is the middle book of this trilogy. And the three books deal with memories and food. Like, it's short stories, and by the end of each story, there's a recipe, a very basic, almost primitive recipe of what we ate when the story occurred. And often people asked me, in Israel, I also published a novel, etc. People said, well, you're talented. Why do you insist on this mix between food writing and real writing? And I don't see any difference between the two. And actually, I think that food is for me at least, it's the agent for memory. So the story with the tears, one day I wanted to recreate the butterfly soup that my grandmother used to serve us when I was a kid. When I was growing up, we were living with my grandmother, and so in the same apartment with my grandmother and my parents and my brother. As it was put to us, she didn't live with us, we lived with her. So she would do the cooking, the very basic cooking. When we didn't eat outside, she and the two maids that we had did the cooking, but she was the boss, of course. And she cooked very simple food. And one of the dishes was what we call butterfly soup. It's a tomato soup with rice, and when you cook rice, it opens to the shape of a butterfly. And I try to make it. I'm not a chef, but I can cook. I'm good at it. And it never turned out right. It was good. It was edible, of course, but it wasn't the real thing. And one day, suddenly I remembered that by the end of cooking, she would grate 2 carrots into the pot in order to sweeten the soup a bit. And the next day, I went to the kitchen, I made the soup again, and I grated 2 carrots, and then I tasted it. And immediately tears into the pot. Immediately I started crying. Because for me, taste it takes me back. I'm not the first one. Marcel Proust was before me, and the Madeleine cookie started a much more important work of art. But for me, it's really a way of traveling in time. And laughter, I think, is always the best way. My grandmother always, I grew up in a home where every foreign language was banned because we were the family responsible for Hebrew in Israel, and we spoke only Hebrew, no Yiddish, no Arabic, no nothing. Although all of them were polyglots, my grandmother spoke 6 languages, my parents spoke 5 languages. But there was one proverb that my grandmother kept telling me in English. Laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry by yourself. And I really, throughout life, I saw that it's true. And sometimes I think that comedy or writing with humor is really, it's good not only because it makes your book more popular or your art more accessible, but also because it lifts the spirits of people. And that's something really important. And the best compliment that my 3 books got and are still getting is that people recovering from cancer tell me that they're reading it and that it makes them laugh. So for me, it's, it's the best.
Wonderful. On the topic, jumping around a little bit, on the topic of memory and food and sort of, these Proustian moments that you talk about, you worked on a really fascinating cookbook as an advisor called Jam Sessions, Recipes for Friendship, Jam, and Remembrance. This book that kind of came out of a project of a group called the Parent Circle Families Forum. That's a joint bereavement group for Palestinians and Israelis. Can you speak a bit to your involvement in this project?
Sure. And it's again a story of tears and laughter, and food. So the Parent Circle is a group of Jewish and Palestinian bereaved people, not necessarily parents, but people who lost members of their family, and in war, of course, not otherwise. And a very dear friend of mine is called Robbie Demlin. She is a lovely, lovely, lovely Israeli lady who unfortunately lost her son. He was shot by a Palestinian sniper. And she sort of started this organization together with Palestinian people. She came from South Africa, and she was very much impressed by the healing process of South Africa after the end of apartheid, where people really learned to live together after all the atrocities that happened. And this tiny group of people is trying to fight for peace and for life. And they meet together, they lecture around the world, they lecture in Israel, they lecture in the Palestinian territories. And they say, listen, nobody wants to experience what we have experienced, of course, but we just want you to know that the pain is the same pain and the grief is the same grief. And it doesn't matter whether you're Palestinian or Israeli, death is death, and it's devastating. And one day, Robbie Demlin calls me. We're old friends. And she tells me, Gil, we meet together, we cry together, we talk together. And I want it to be fun, too. I don't want it to be about grief all the time. So why don't you come and cook with us? Because cooking, the air moves when you cook and things happen. And I said, well, gladly, I will, of course. And she said, I just want you to know one thing. I just want to prepare you. You're not going to see people crying. It's not about crying. Our meetings are fun. And it'll be different than what you expect. And I came over. They have this rule that everything should be symmetrical. So if there's a meeting in Israel, there would be another meeting in the Palestinian territories. And if they go to lecture, it would be a Jewish person and an Arab, etc., etc., etc. And we cooked together. Now, again, this is very naive. For them, it was very happy because this guy from television came and cooked with them. It was an honor for them. Of course, they cooked better than I did. But it was fun, and we laughed, and we ate together, and we gave presents to one another, and we made new friends, and it evolved into a series of meetings, and then we decided to make I wouldn't call it a book; it's a booklet of the recipes that we made. We called it Jam Session because we were cooking mainly jams and preserves, and it was as if we're preserving the memory of those who are no longer with us. And a nice story about it is that a few years ago, Robbie was in Ramallah in a hall where Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, was giving a speech. And by the end of his speech, she stood on her feet and she said, Mr. Abu Mazen, I would like to give you a present. And she started walking to the stage, and immediately the Palestinian security people, rushed to her, and she said, guys, leave me alone. I'm an old woman, I cannot kill anybody. And he said, let her come, let her come. And she came over, she handed him the book, and I have a picture of, Abu Mazen holding the book that I published. It's a great honor. So this is the book. And for me, it opened, a door to a whole world that I was aware of, but I wasn't a part of, thankfully. But I'm glad that I could connect this way with these amazing people and with the really wonderful thing that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that stands out to me, a lot of times, especially in reading through the book or the booklet of jam sessions, is that people comment that sort of the Palestinian cuisine and Israeli cuisine is often very similar. Do you see differences between these two? How do you see the contribution of Palestinian cuisine to the evolution of modern Israeli cuisine, as you would define it?
There's a lot of similarities. It depends on how you look at Israeli culture. In the past, people used to look at mainstream Israeli culture as the sort of Eastern European origins or Western origins, and then what has evolved from them in Israel. Nowadays, we're more inclusive. Of course, we know that there is a lot of culture that came to Israel from Asia and Africa and from the Middle East. But basically, I would say that not only food-wise, we are becoming more and more Arab. We're becoming a part of the Middle East. And for you, many of you are Americans, for you, it would be maybe a surprise, but it's really, really, really difficult to find gefilte fish and chicken soup and knishes in Israel. These are long gone dishes of the past. You don't find it in restaurants anymore. You would find hummus and falafel and pita bread and fresh vegetables and frike and tons of Arab stuff. Now, this is because, Israel embraces whatever the terroir serves or offers. And of course, Israel is not a European country and not an American country. It's a Middle Eastern country. Sometimes it gets funny. Sometimes you can see the feud or the war or the rivalry. For instance, a few years ago, Israel was sued by Lebanon, by our neighbors from up north, for stealing two of Lebanon's national dishes, hummus and tabbouleh. Now, this may sound ridiculous, but if you think about appellation, appellation means that some dishes may bear a name only if they come from a certain region. So blue cheese is wonderful, but only if it's made in Roquefort in France, it's Roquefort. Otherwise, it's just blue cheese. And the Lebanese claim that hummus and tabbouleh are Lebanese. And we may not market Sabra hummus abroad and call it hummus. We should call it chickpea spread. And they lost because it's not patented. And actually, I think that the notion of appellation is a bit problematic. But you can see that not always it is celebrated, the fact that Israel embraced Arab dishes. Or for instance, the national Israeli salad, this very well-chopped vegetable salad. In Israel, you can see immediately political beliefs by the way people call this salad. If you're a left-winger, you would call this Arab salad. And if you're a right-winger, you would call it an Israeli salad. So it's, there's much more than spicing for when you deal with Israeli food.
Yes, absolutely. I had a friend once ask me the same thing, does it really matter if you call it, Arab, Palestinian, Israeli? And I said, yes, you don't understand. It's all in the name of the salad.
It's like ordering, God forbid, Turkish coffee in Greece. They would kill you. It's Greek coffee. So we're sensitive, yes.
Exactly. And so in the sort of absence of gefilte fish, of chicken soup, of these things, Mizrahi food is really kind of the dominant, I think, foodscape in Israel today. Why is that? What sort of changed or what happened?
First of all, it's better. My apologies, but it's better. And it's also truer to the terroir. It's again, Israel is stuck in the middle of the Middle East. And if we're talking about Mizrahi food, it would be dishes that came from North Africa, from Iraq, from Syria, from Iran, from Turkey, maybe from Spain. This is much closer to the climate and to the nature of Israel. So if you want to make even cholent, not to mention pacha or gefilte fish or borscht, it would be rather difficult in Israel because the ingredients, you would have them. There's an abundance of ingredients in Israel. We do not miss a thing. But they wouldn't be genuine. So if you really taste Eastern European food in Europe, it tastes better because the cream is better, because the schmaltz is better, because the root vegetables are more proper. And in Israel, it's very good, but it doesn't fit the climate, it doesn't fit the ingredients, etc., etc. So I think that little by little, we're becoming more and more Mizrahi, but everybody says about Israel that it's a third world country with first world technology. And that's what's nice about it. And I would say that it's a Mizrahi country, but with cooking techniques of the world. So Israeli food, that's what gives it the wonderfulness, because it has chutzpah. And it just like us, it doesn't respect anything, and it's totally ruthless, and it's like Israelis, it's totally disobedient, and everything goes, and the combinations, blow your mind, and in the end, it's super. It's really good, and this is why Israeli food is having a moment, or an hour, or a week, or a decade, or I don't know what, but it's very successful around the world right now.
Mm-hmm. I went to a conference a few months back in Washington where chefs, scholars all came together to talk about what Israeli food is. And after 2 days of talking, I don't think that there was actually an answer. Do you think that there is such a thing as Israeli cuisine?
Not yet. We're very young. I mean, tomorrow we're going to be 70 years old. The nature of Israeli cuisine would be I would say Eastern Mediterranean food. So think of Greek cooking, think of Italian cooking, only make it sharper, hotter, and with more sunshine in it. And more open to the world too, because you would find, ginger, or you would find stuff that is not necessarily Middle Eastern, but in Israeli cuisine, everything goes, so you'll find it rooted into our kitchens. But there is not yet really an Israeli cuisine. The two things that we claim, three actually, that we claim that are totally ours are cherry tomatoes that we invented, shkedei marak, soup mandel, these yellow squares that you sprinkle on your soup, and chicken schnitzel. But all the rest is borrowed, stolen, you'll decide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So what do you see, or can you talk a bit about the role that celebrity chefs, about food television play in shaping Israeli food, foodways, cuisine?
Unfortunately, they do have a great role. I do not like, you may have noticed, I do not like these television shows. I did a lot of food TV years ago, and then I shied away from it because it became too big and too loud and too, bloodthirsty, and I didn't want to be a mentor, and I didn't want to be a judge, and I didn't want to tell an elderly lady in front of the cameras, well, I'm sorry, but this doesn't pass. Who am I to say that? So I don't like it. It's very big in Israel, like it is abroad. I do not like the fact that chefs became the new rock stars, because I really do think, I admire chefs, and I'm not a chef. I never studied cookery, so, they are more educated than I am, and I respect them. But I don't think that they're great philosophers, and I don't think that I need to read about what they think about art and the world and this and that. Let them cook. So I'm not that impressed with this kind of shows, to put things mildly.
And going back a bit to sort of Tel Aviv as like a foodie hub in shaping maybe larger Israeli cuisine, why is Tel Aviv such a sort of node for so many chefs, for so many trends in Israeli cuisine more broadly?
Well, first of all, Tel Aviv is the center of Israel. Jerusalem is the capital, but Tel Aviv is the big city. Jerusalem and Tel Aviv are very different. In Tel Aviv, it would be really hard to find a kosher restaurant. In Jerusalem, it would be hard to find a non-kosher restaurant. So unfortunately, Jerusalem is a religious city. And this is why I left Jerusalem. I was born in Jerusalem. I live in Tel Aviv like everybody else. And first of all, mathematically, non-kosher food is better than kosher food. You just have more combinations. Now, kosher food can be delicious. I love it, yeah. But once you cannot mix meat and dairy, and once you cannot use seafood or shellfish or pork, then you have less options. So non-kosher food is more colorful. Tel Aviv is the financial center of Israel, and so this is where everybody goes. So this is where it happens. And Tel Aviv is very hip. So now Tel Aviv is the vegan capital, not only of the Middle East, but it's one of the most vegan-friendly cities in the world. There are tons of vegan restaurants in Tel Aviv, and sometimes it's even tasty. In some cases.
Yes, the little heart with the vegan friendly is on so many restaurants, especially in like Florentine and everything.
Yes, it's also because the Israeli menu and the Israeli terroir and the merwar and the Israeli produce is very vegan friendly, and it offers itself to veganism because everything is in season all year round, and it's very easy to live on fruit and vegetables in Israel. So you don't feel that you miss out on a lot of stuff because really the produce is really great in Israel.
The sort of popularity of vegan vegetarian today, do you think that it has any relationship to sort of austerity mentalities, cooking without very much meat in the early state years, or do you think it's an unrelated phenomenon?
I think it's unrelated. I didn't know that, but Israelis, I always thought that Israelis do not eat a lot of meat. And because we didn't. At home, we ate one chicken per week. Outside, we ate meat, but at home, not that we were vegetarian, but it just wasn't a part of our diet. But then, one day, first of all, when I got to the army, I discovered that every day meat is served. Every day, except for Tuesdays. On Tuesdays, it's fish day. So you fast. But then there was some kind of a financial crisis in Israel. I don't even remember when. And on television, they said that maybe the army would have a meatless day. And everybody was appalled. But what would the soldiers do? And how would they live? And how would they live on vegetables? And I said, I grew up on it. Come on. So I think that Israelis do eat a lot of meat. And especially, again, tomorrow is our national day. You won't see a live cow in Israel. All of them were slaughtered because this is what you eat on the national day. You eat grilled meat, so people eat it a lot.
Why is grilled meat specifically so much the trend on the celebration of?
It's very immediate. It's very easy to make. I think that the male brain can fathom it, which is very rare. It's like football, Why is football so popular? Because males can understand what it is. And my apologies, yes. And it's outside food, and Israel is very hot, so it's really it's nice for picnics, etc. And it makes a lot of smoke, and the man in the family tells his wife, "Step aside, let me," and he feels really responsible for it.
Excellent. On sort of the topic of gender, I wanted to go back to you getting into cooking when you were younger. I mean, the kitchen is traditionally a very female space, one where there's a lot of sort of intergenerational transmission from grandmothers to mothers to the granddaughters or daughters. And so was that, especially when you were younger, was it odd or was it difficult for you to express that interest in food or to get into kitchens?
So when I was growing up, as I told you, we were living with my grandmother, and we always had two maids. And I come from a Sephardi family, so Sephardis live in clans. So we had a big house with two apartments. In one apartment we lived with my grandmother, and the adjacent apartment, my aunt, her husband, and their 3 children. So we were 5 grandchildren of my grandmother. I was the youngest, the nerdiest. I was always, whitish and cross-eyed and schlimazel. And my grandmother always protected me from the bunch. And so you would assume that I would say that, I hung with her and under her apron, and I was in the kitchen with her, and this is how I got interested in cooking. But no. With Sephardi people, men in the kitchen bring only 2 things, dirt and bad luck. So she never let me into the kitchen. And the day she died, when I was a soldier, I was 20 years old, I started cooking, just to remember, again, her flavor. And this is how I got into cooking. Before that, I never cooked. It's not that I wasn't interested in food. I was, but everybody is, but I never cooked.
So then moving back to sort of the topic of the chef, the celebrity chef, in the US and the UK, to a lesser extent in Canada, we see sort of right now, I think, a real moment for chefs who are celebrity chefs, who are also activist chefs, who use their platform as sort of celebrities to talk about ecology, to talk about issues of race, racial equality. Do we see something like this in Israel where chefs are using this?
Thankfully, no. Oh, God, no. We do have one chef who is sort of we call him the eggplant poet, because he keeps talking about, how the eggplant felt before it was slaughtered, and then he met a tomato and one fish that ran away from the school. Oh, God. It's so stupid. Come on. I don't like it. And, I did a show on television that was called Captain Cook. It was about the best restaurants in the world. So for 2 seasons, for almost 2 years, I was traveling the world through 3 Michelin star restaurants and tasting what's considered the best food in the world. Not necessarily it was the best food, but I've been to the best restaurants, or the most expensive, or the most famous restaurants in the world. And I must say that in most cases, these chefs were not so into themselves. I mean, they were in the kitchen, they were hard workers, lots of ego, but they were not handing out pamphlets about war, peace, and equality. No, they were busy with shrimp.
On the eggplant poet, it seems to me, at least the last couple of times that I've been in Israel, that this dish of sabich is having sort of this amazing moment where everyone is really interested in eating it. Can you talk a little bit about that and why? Why is there, sabich oved and gefilte? Why does everybody want this?
So sabich is a bit of a mystery, because there's a feud about who invented it and how did it come to be. Sabich is pita bread with fried egg. It's an Iraqi dish. It's pita bread with fried eggplant, tahini, hard-boiled egg, and amba, which is the Iraqi yellow sauce, which is very dangerous. I mean, you eat amba and then you smell of it for a week. But it's so good that you can't stop eating it. And then you add some parsley. It's very good. It's very filling. Now, there are 2 versions. One says that sabich is the abbreviation of sim batzal yoter chatzil, which is put onions and more eggplants. The truth, I think, is that sabich, if you speak Arabic, and if you don't learn Arabic, it's the most beautiful language in the world. So sabah is morning. Sabih is, let's say, morning light. And it's a family name in Iraq. It's the last name of a person called Sabich. And the Sabich family immigrated to Israel. Many Jews fled from the Arab world to Israel after Israel was established because they were persecuted in their own countries. And this Sabich guy was very poor, and he opened a kiosk by the end of a bus line that drives to Givatayim. Givatayim is a city adjacent to Tel Aviv. And they were so poor that they put the leftovers. What did they sell? The leftovers from breakfast in pita bread. This is what they served to the bus drivers, and everybody fell in love with it. And they would come by the end of their shift to his kiosk and say, Sabich, Sabich, give me something to eat. And everybody started calling it Sabich. And years ago, in one of my shows, when I was trying to do a story about Sabich, I got to this person, and in front of the cameras, he takes out his identity card and he says, see, it writes Sabich in my identity card. This is my name. It's my dish. And it's good, it's simple, it's direct. This is what I find the best in food, when it's that simple that you cannot avoid it. You just have to fall in love with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I always love watching, at something like a Hakosem, the magician in Tel Aviv, which is a very popular sabich falafel joint that people in sweatpants or people in business suits eat it, and it's so messy. It's such an equalizer because you have amba all over.
It's actually an art to eat either falafel or sabich without amba or tahini staining your tie. It's because there's always, when they make pita bread, there's always this hidden hole. Slack! Always. The right posture is like this. You have to eat it like this. But
Just legs apart, keep it off of you.
yes.
All right, and I'm going to just end, I suppose, for me with one question, and then we'll open it up for discussion. But going back to the topic of Ashkenazi food, I'm always very interested in talking to people as we spoke about the topic of gefilte fish. You said in an interview with Haaretz on Foodie Delight that you find gefilte fish contrary to human nature. Why is gefilte fish this?
Contrary to culture.
To culture. So why was it been such a staple of or associated with Ashkenazi food, and why is there so much shame in admitting the love of gefilte?
First, I'll tell you about gefilte. Once I had a daily show about food, and a daily show is a very, very hungry animal that you have to feed all the time. 24 minutes of talking about food every day. What is there to say? So I came up with an idea that in order to kill 3 minutes of the show, we would have this column that was called the Trauma Ward, where we brought over celebrities and we served them the food that they hate. And we talked with them about why do they hate this food. The majority was gefilte. We had, I would say 100 episodes of this show. I think that at least 70 portions of gefilte were served. People just hate it, or love it, of course. But it's first of all, it's very weird to celebrate spring with gray fish. Why? Why shouldn't it be colorful? And don't talk to me about this one slice of carrot in its mouth or over its eye. It's not enough. This is not color. Secondly, usually you make gefilte fish from carp, which is a very basic fish filled with bones, and it's just not good. Let's face it. So I don't know. I'm really against it.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So now we can open it up to the audience if people have questions.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Welcome, and this is wonderful. And I must tell you what the truth this is, because I used to listen to your father on the radio.
He had a better voice.
No, it's fine. It's wonderful. I think the title of I'm sorry I was late. Did you start by expanding on the title, which was wartime food?
Yes.
In Israel. So I'm sorry I missed it. Did you talk about kuzbara?
Kuzbara. We should talk about mallow. We should talk about in my family, there's a dish that my grandmother used to make. My late grandmother, she wouldn't make it tomorrow, but she used to make it for Independence Day, for our National Day. We used to call it victory patties. And why is that? Because when there was the siege of Jerusalem, people were so hungry that there was nothing to eat. The bread rationing was half a loaf of bread per family per week, and water was 2 cups of water per person per day. So people picked mallow. Mallow grows it's a green that grows in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, everywhere, just outside. And on the radio, they got instructions of how to cook it. And usually mallow is something you give to chicken. So they say that the Jordanians who heard the transmission in Hebrew knew that they were going to win. They said if the Jews are eating mallow already, they're going to surrender soon. My grandmother used to make, during the siege, mallow patties. And these were always considered, she used to make it afterwards. She made it every national day, every Independence Day, just to remember the victory in that war. It was a horrendous war. It was the most difficult war of Israel, the war in which the largest number of civilians died. And we used to cook it just to remember those times. One day, I was telling my aunt from my father's side, my grandmother is from, this grandmother is from my mother's side, and I was telling my aunt from my father's side, who came from a much poorer family, about, yes, how during the siege they ate mallow patties at home because they were so poor and they were so, they had nothing. And my aunt from the Yemenite poor side said, they were poor, they were rich, they could make patties. Do you know how we ate it? Your grandmother, your Yemenite grandmother from my father's side would crawl to the field under sniper fire, pick a few leaves, just mush them with salt in her hand and shove it into our mouths. We did not have a pan, we did not have oil, we did not have fire. We couldn't have made patties. So the lesson to be learned is that there are always people who are poorer than you. So there.
Any further questions?
Yes, please.
First of all, thank you very much.
Thank you.
2 anecdotes. They said that in Israel, the fish are already gefilte with the carrots in them in the Sea of Galilee. And another one, I was born before the state of Israel in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem, but I remember eggplant. Well, I am not a chef, but I know at least a dozen of recipes with that.
You can make everything from eggplant. Yes, chopped liver, yes, dessert, everything.
One of the Israeli inventions is vegetarian chopped liver.
Fake chopped liver, yes, which is very good, by the way. It's really good. It's having a moment right now. It's doing a comeback. Vegetarian chopped liver. First of all, it's good because it's vegetarian, so vegetarians can eat it. But secondly, it's really, really, really good. It's really good. So yes, it's known that Israelis can make everything from eggplants. It's true. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you again for this enlightening talk.
Thank you.
How would you comment on the state of the wines in reference to the food that is being cooked?
Mm-hmm. So Israel had a wine revolution in the beginning of the 80s. Up until the 80s, there were 2 wineries in Israel. Carmel, which is still the biggest winery in Israel, started by Baron Rothschild, and another winery, small winery. Then, in the beginning of the 80s, we had the wine revolution, a group of 5 kibbutzim, 5 villages in the north of, call it Israel or don't, in the Golan Heights. It's not clear whether it's Israel or not, but it's ruled by Israel right now. They started a winery called the Golan Heights Winery, and they made wine, New World wine. Their winemaker studied in Davis in California, and he made for the first time New World wines in Israel because Carmel is traditionally French. And the wine was super good. And then more wineries started opening in Israel. Now there are about 150 wineries in Israel. And usually, in Israel, they make New World wines. It's funny because the best wine of Israel, the best winery, the most successful, not most popular, but most successful winery in Israel is called Castel, and they make traditionally French wines in the Judean hills near Jerusalem. But if you look at the Golan winery and the Chateau Golan winery and the Yatir winery, which is the most southern winery in Israel, it's really deep in the desert. These are robust, heavy, New World wines, very good and quite expensive. Israeli wine is expensive because of kashrut, because of kosher reasons. You have to operate in a different way. It's very complex. So Israeli wines are, if you want to buy a good, cheap table wine in Israel, you would go Italian or Australian or Argentinian. If you buy Israeli wine, it means that you're having an event.
As a matter of fact, I was very surprised in Tel Aviv, in the supermarkets, how expensive the Israeli wine is.
Yes, it is expensive. It's not outrageously expensive, but it is more expensive than your average Italian or French or, Australian wine. Yes. Yes, please.
Historically, Israeli food was quite healthy, with fruits and vegetables, and the population was relatively thin and fit. Now when you go into a grocery store, they have all that, but they also have everything we have here. And so do you see that changing, and do you see Israel moving toward more the American style diet?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Style.
Yes, we're getting fatter. Yes, we are. There are statistics, yeah. A lot of sugar, a lot of processed food. Israel, in that sense, we have all the illness of the West. Yes, but still, it's very easy to live off fresh and healthy stuff in Israel. But no, give a child a cheeseburger or an eggplant, they would go for the cheeseburger. What can we do? Yes, please.
Normally at this point of the proceedings, I would ask a question and more or less wrap up, but I'm left speechless by your vicious attack on gefilte fish.
I knew that there would be a gefilte advocate in the crowd.
Yeah. That aside, I'm interested in another phenomenon that characterizes the Israeli culinary scene, and that is the constant tension between kosher and non-kosher. Recently, kosher represents not only an approach to the management of food, but also the political control of the people who certify what is kosher and what is not kosher. And that's clearly a problem for the development of whole sections of Israeli food in hotels and so on. Recently, there's been a phenomenon to revolt against
the rabbinical, yeah,
and to have a different form of certification. How significant is that? Will they win?
It is significant. The question is, how do you deal with the kosher problem in Israel? So in Israel, there is the rabbinical authority that decides what is kosher and what isn't. And you have to have a stamp or a document that is saying that your product or your restaurant is kosher. Otherwise, people who are religious won't eat there, won't eat it, or won't venture into your restaurant. So most hotels in Israel are kosher. Most supermarket chains in Israel won't sell non-kosher stuff. There is one big chain that does, but all the others do not. So it's a major issue, and the question is, how do Israelis deal with that? Because recently there was this movement of trying to create another authority that would say whether things are kosher or non-kosher, but not within the rabbinical system. And I truly hope that this would be successful, and I do see people supporting it. For instance, there are many restaurants in Israel that now declare that we serve a kosher food, but without the kosher certificate. And the rabbinical system, being so fierce, is suing them because it turns out that the word kosher is patented. So you're not supposed to use the word kosher on your certificate if it's not through the rabbinical system. I, for instance, being the nano-celebrity that I am in Israel, marry people because people refuse to get married through the rabbinical system in Israel. Because again, for those of you who are Americans, in many cases, American Jews see religion as a sort of embracing community, something very pleasant and nice and family style. For secular people in Israel, the rabbinical system is more about corruption and oppression. And we try to keep away from it, and we try not to let it infiltrate into our lives. So, for instance, the most of my secular friends, when they got married, did not get married by a rabbi. They traveled to Cyprus to get married in a foreign country, and then it's recognized in Israel, but they got a civilian marriage. In Israel, you do not have civilian marriage. It's illegal. Now there is this civilian agreement, so I'm called the weeping rabbi. I started with marrying gay couples, but later on I started marrying straight couples as well, and I would always burst out crying when the mothers would be speaking under the chuppah. So I'm a self-proclaimed rabbi, and again, when it comes to food, I make a point of writing about kosher and non-kosher. I make a point of cooking kosher and non-kosher on television. And, if there are any protests, and usually there are no protests, but if there are any protests after a show in which I cook shellfish, I say, well, use the remote. That's it. To end our conversation, I just have to tell you another story because, as you see, it's very difficult for an Israeli to shut up. Something that I think tells a lot about Israeli food, about the importance of food in Israel, and not necessarily in Israel, but all over the world. So usually, I am asked, as a restaurant critic, when you come to a restaurant, when you enter a restaurant, what do you look for? And I say I look for truth. And, this is a bit embarrassing. It sounds full of hot air. Come on, this is just food, truth, food. But a few years ago, I learned that what I was saying was true. I went to write a column about a very simple Libyan restaurant in the north of Israel, in Hadera. Hadera is a small town in the north of Israel. And the guy, the owner of this very, very, very simple greasy spoon, told me his story. So his name was Eliko, and he was born in Libya, and his family was very rich. They had the Ford car agency for the whole of North Africa. But after Israel was established in 1948, Jews, as I said, were persecuted in the Arab world, and they had to flee their home with only their clothes on, with nothing at all. And they arrived in Israel as refugees in 1950. The state was very poor. It could not supply housing or almost food to all the waves of refugees that came from Europe and from the Arab world. So Israel started makeshift tent towns. And they lived, it was called Ma'abara. And they lived in such a Ma'abara. It was, 1,000 tents, and they were living in one of them. And 2 years later, they even got an apartment, a one-room apartment. And when I say one room, I mean a studio apartment, not one bedroom. A family of 8 people, 2 parents, 6 children, in one room. They split the room In one half they lived, in the other half they opened a grocery shop of which they lived, and the kids got good education, of course lots of love, but good education too. And Elicho became a car mechanic, and a very good one. And later he had his own garage, and he became rich. But at the age of 50, he told me, he discovered that he was not doing what he was supposed to do. He said, my vocation in life is to feed people. He closed his garage, and he opened a very simple Libyan restaurant in which he cooked the dishes that he knew from home. And one day his mom came to visit him, and he told her, Mom, look at me. There's something that's killing me here. Look at me. I'm well-to-do. I have my own business. I have money. I have workers. I have the best equipment. I have all the produce that I need to whatever I want, I just order by phone and it gets here. And I cook your dishes, but it's never as good as it used to be. It's never as delicious as it was on tin plates in that half-room apartment. Why is it so? And his mom looked at him and answered in Arabic. She said, Ya ibni, my son, you didn't get it yet? It's because we were hungry. And this is the answer. Truth and difficulty come together. When everything is la-di-da, you lose your grip of life. Things should be rough. And this is what I like about food. When people make food from their heart, when people serve you something that they really believe in, which is the complete opposite of molecular cooking. So with that, I finished bad-mouthing most of the world's cuisine. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.